We are following some breaking news just into Court TV out of the state of California, where we are learning that millionaire real estate heir and convicted murderer Robert Durst has died. Here is a statement from one of his attorneys, Chip Lewis. He said, quote, Mr. Durst passed away early this morning while in the custody of the California Department of Corrections. We understand that his death was due to natural causes associated with the litany of medical issues we had repeatedly reported to the court over the last couple of years. We will issue no further statements and will not entertain any questions out of respect, end quote. Now, we know that Robert Durst was 78 years old. Over the last several months, you saw lots of reporting about him here on Court TV Live. We covered his trial for you in California, that one that spanned from springtime into the fall, where he was found guilty of the murder of his best friend and publicist, Susan Berman. And then recently we heard that he was charged in the state of New York because his first wife, Kathleen Durst, whose body's never been found, by the way, and her killing's never been solved, and her case came up largely during the California case. It was almost like that prosecutor, John Lewin, did 3 prosecutions talking about how the cover-up of Kathy's killing was the motivation for Susan to be killed because she was a witness and someone who helped Robert Durst cover up the crime. And so we heard so much about Kathy Durst's killing that prosecutors in New York decided to submit the evidence to a grand jury, and he was indicted, facing murder charges in New York for the killing of his wife, Kathleen McCormick Durst. So those charges still pending right now in criminal court. And of course, that case can no longer be pursued because the defendant is dead. But hopefully these families feel some bit of justice, knowing that at least Kathy Durst's case was brought to light through that case in California that was prosecuted brilliantly by Deputy DA John Lewin. And this is a look at Durst in the courtroom. One of the days looked very sick and ill throughout much of this trial. And we know that his attorneys repeatedly said to the court, this is a risk, continuing with his trial. He's got a laundry list of health issues and he cannot proceed. And they did proceed. And we know that the conviction was the result. So he dies a convicted killer. Robert Durst dies today at the age of 78, this 10th day of January, dies in the custody of the California Department of Corrections. Natural causes due to the long list of health issues he has. Let me bring in my guest on the program now, civil rights attorney, former prosecutor Eric Fudali. Eric is based in New York, where that prosecution would have taken place. Eric, this was definitely a concern of mine, as I'm sure it was of yours and many watching this case. Would he make it in time for justice to be had in New York? And now we know the answer.
Right. You hope, the victims, many victims, or at least, alleged that Robert Durst killed, find some solace, in the fact that he was going to be tried again in New York. There were multiple convictions against him, and that ultimately he died where he should have died, which was in, the Department of Corrections, in the custody Department of Corrections. So, of course, you feel for the victims, and you see this, unfortunately, where a defendant dies before trial and the victims are left without that, without their day in court, without, that semblance of justice that they've desired for so long, but in this case, I think the fact that he ultimately, died in prison, died in the custody of departments of corrections, hopefully brings some solace to the families of his victims.
Exactly. I sure hope. And we know that Kathleen McCormick Durst's family members and through their attorneys were very invested in that California prosecution, rightfully so. And we know that I remember seeing, and I want to say it was either Susan Berman's cousin or an uncle. There was a family member when it was time for the victim impact statements that day of sentencing, and we broadcast it live. Remember him standing up and saying to the judge, can I say something to Robert Durst? And the judge said, well, you can say it to me. You can't really say it to him or ask him a question, was what he wanted to do. And he said, well, Your Honor, we just want to know where Kathy Durst's body is buried so that we can tell her family and try to help them get some closure like we were hoping for today with that verdict in California. And I really thought that spoke volumes about the civility between these families, especially in light of the fact that we know Susan, the deceased, was accused, by the prosecutor, who was seeking justice for, of covering up the death that she understood her best friend carried out, with respect to Kathy. So I remember that moment. And so, Eric, tell me, these lawyers, obviously they're smart. They're going to try to pursue justice any way they can now. What do you think they can do civilly? Or are they going to try to go after his estate to get some justice for Kathy Durst?
That's certainly an option if that's something they want to pursue. Obviously, I don't know at this point what is in the estate of Robert Durst. Certainly, there were a lot of legal fees, and I'm sure a lot of it has been depleted. But you said a really interesting word there. Is it's closure, right? And I think what probably all the families of the victims want is some semblance of closure, some semblance of justice. And I work with victims a lot, of course, and that's something that we always discuss is how do we get closure here? How do you move forward on your life? And perhaps his death will be the closure that the victims' families need. Perhaps there will be something, that's missing now that he died without all the information revealed. But, my hope for the victims' families is that they do have some sort of closure now that his life is over, now that he died in the Department of Corrections. Hopefully they can at least push forward a bit.
Yes, so we wish for them to have closure and peace. Eric Fudali, always great to have you as a guest. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for being with us at home. We'll be right back after this quick break.